And can I just share a few things that struck me, which is, having just been to a conference on international humanitarianism where nobody mentioned Iraq or American tortures, because it was in America, I started wondering whether we were a little bit like that too, and whether we talked a lot about impact on policy, how our research might actually shape the world, and not an awful lot about how the world has shaped our research. And perhaps we ought to think a little bit more about that procedure and process. I've been, for example, to the RC UK Global Uncertainties sort of presentation, and I was quite struck to see that it included things such as global awareness of disasters, but also how to recognize a terrorist in a crowd of people going through an airport. So I think that a lot of our research has conditionalities which are political, which involve not only a degree of responsibility, but also a degree of perhaps, how to put it politely, well, perhaps subservience and perhaps voluntary engagement with agendas over which we have limited control. So I think that's one thing that struck me as potentially of interest, partially because also some of the research we do can be instrumentalized, and we are sometimes party to the instrumentalization of our own research. We've often presented in this all the way today that the media misconstrue, misrepresent. What about researchers misconstruing and misrepresenting their own work? What degree of connivance or unwarranted friendships do we engage with? I think we need to engage with those particular points. But there were much more positive terms that are picked up also. In fact, we talked at one stage about unstable evidence, which I thought was, and we had this contrast between a desire for the replicable experimental evidence and the unstable evidence, a contrast which was marked between the social sciences and the arts perhaps, but which deserves to be further refined. We also have this contrast, which I thought was very powerfully made, between evidence and advocacy. And I think that was, advocacy being, if not negative, at least something that needs to speak its own name and not pretend to be something that it isn't. And I think that's, again, in other words, what I'm thinking here is that we've got a lot of work to do on the politics of research. And perhaps it's not only about social responsibility, it's about social politics and how we engage politically with our research, or not, as a matter of fact. Another aspect that struck me in terms of question that arose, but I think perhaps we need to discuss how we might push this further, is the issue of scale. How our research touches on sometimes very general aspects, or sometimes has very micro, even micro-local implications. And I think the scale and social responsibility, it seems to me like an interesting issue that was implicit in a lot of the papers that we've heard today. But these are just a few things. I was obviously interested in the ethics aspect, and from a practical point of view, I was actually wondering, can we do something with that? I mean, we've been talking a lot about the boundaries, the limitations of ethical processes that a university such as Manchester pushes forward, but it's not only Manchester, it's the entirety of the research apparatus. Can we do something with that? Is this an agenda we want to push? How do we push it? How do we engage with if you want, moving from the tick boxing to the rather more holistic, but perhaps a little bit too agonizing ethical exploration of our own work?